I'm not going to be with your big split pattern.
More than this, we have some. Here's my dear, we're going to be you and me. It is a required my partner, Andrea, I see you. Can you hear us? You're driving. You're welcome. Thank you so much for that response. Yeah, I think that was so small. Good.
I can hear you now.
Okay,
And
thank you.
divorces can be confusing.
Yes.
Very, very confusing, especially like for your clients. And part of the issue is that divorce attorneys are not real estate attorneys. And it's like, I don't know as much about divorce as they do. They don't know as much about real estate. So they all set up the settlement agreement incorrectly. Therefore, they explain it incorrectly, which is source of confusion.
Yeah, and now we're talking about a new house. She's like, I don't do anything till before it's final. If it's a new build, I was like, you could, you know, tell them the deposit. It's not building. And she's like, no, no, no. And I was like, okay, we'll wait for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it is way too important to go into sell from the beginning, but.
How think about it. So if she were to complete the purchase before the divorce was finalized, it would still probably be Oh my gosh, I sent you the wrong power. Hold on, let me go to the right one. I'm so sorry, that's kind of.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Can you send it to front desk? Good morning, everyone. Ashley sent me the wrong presentation, so she's gonna go send that to me and then we'll get going, okay? Okay, thumbs up. You're frozen, Astoria. How's everybody doing this morning? Hey, Diego.
Hey, Jessica.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's good to see you.
See you too.
Love it or list it. I love that. Hey, Martha. How are you? Diego.
Oh. No. Nothing.
Yeah. Good, how are you? Ashley sent me the wrong presentation, but she is.
Okay, there, you should have it. You're welcome, sorry about that. How are you? Good. I was moving quickly. And I hit the wrong button. What?
She's in the car.
Okay. There's probably won't be taking a ton of notes if we go, right? We try not to, all right. Right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. A group behind John too.
Perfect. What I was saying before I brushed out my the middle of it, is that if she were to actually buy it while they were still technically married, like the divorce wasn't complete, questions would get asked when she went to sell it, and it would probably be fine, but she would still have to provide all the divorce documents. She buys it the day after the divorce is finalized, no questions asked.
Right.
So it would probably be okay, but I get what she's saying, but going under contract with them, that.
That's what I told her, we're building. I said, it's not gonna, you'll be way done, but she is like terrified now. She doesn't even want to go under contract.
I mean, I understand why she would be nervous about it,
Right.
but. All right, guys, well, we'll go ahead and get started. I think y'all all know me, but I'm actually with OKS again, and here I'll close. Y'all know my office is right across the hall, and I love when y'all pop by to see me, text me, call me, what have you. I am here for you guys. But today, what I wanted to talk about was what happens, you know, if you've been to Chart Masters, you've heard Leslie talk about the different Ds that prompt people to need to buy a new property, and two of those are diamonds and divorce. So I figured we would talk about those together. So what are we doing when you have buyers or sellers that are getting married, just got married, and then buyers or sellers who are getting divorced are already divorced? And the chunk of it is gonna be talking about sellers who are divorced, because that's gonna require the most effort on your part, but I wanted to touch on all of it. Whenever I teach, I love for it to be interactive, so if you have thoughts, questions, you know, throw up your hand, we'll talk about it, definitely feel free to interrupt me. So, we just talked about buyer's getting married, divorced, seller's getting married, and divorced, and a pretty great picture, because we all love this. So we'll start with buyers, and then when they're getting married. So really just a few things to keep in mind. The first, and as far as being engaged, you know, your name doesn't change at all, right? So super exciting. I have seen some buyers say, well, I want to buy in my new name. We got engaged, we're gonna get married in 3 months, and I want the title to have what my new name is gonna be. We cannot do that. We've gotta match the name that is on the ID. So just kind of keep that in mind. Same thing if they've gotten married. So if you've gotten married, does your name automatically change? Legally?
No.
No,
No, it does not. So, like, you know, I'm Ashley Nance, get married to Tyler Connor. I'm Ashley Nance until I go change my ID to say Ashley Connor. And we see that a lot where, you know, I just haven't gotten around to changing my name, but it is my name now, so can I go ahead and buy it like that? The answer is no, it's gotta match the ID. So if you have a buyer where, you know, she says, we got married last month, I wanna start looking for houses, it's a great idea for you guys to say, are you gonna wanna buy the name or buy the house in your new name if you're planning on changing it? If they say yes, say, you need to do that before we go under contract, and go ahead and start that process. We can take any government issued photo ID. So if they wanna update their license, great, they wanna update the passport, great. Either one is fine, but go ahead and ask that question when you start working with them, and you have people who just got married, and that way you can give them that valuable piece of information. You're pretty much stuck with the name on your ID, so if you want the new name, fix the ID to be the name that you want it to be, okay? They need to sign the contract with the name on the ID, which is why I say, get it updated before you go under contract. Same thing for the loan. So many times, and I don't quite understand the lenders who don't ask for ID, but some of them don't ask for ID. So if they ask for ID, they'll have it set up correctly from the get-go, but some lenders never ask for it. So if you have people who just got married, they introduce, you know, she says, I'm Ashley Connor, she signs the contract, Ashley Connor, she applies for the loan as Ashley Connor, never gives anyone her ID, shows up for closing, it says Ashley Nance, we've got a bit of a problem. Because from the lender's perspective, Ashley Connor does not exist, right? So we represent the lender. If the lender needed to foreclose, they wouldn't be able to, or they might have an issue doing that because Ashley Connor is not a real person, okay? I know that's sort of like meta, big picture stuff, but legally, that's how it would look. So we have to get the lender on board. The pushback there is we've already run credit on Ashley Nance, we don't wanna have to go run credit, or on Ashley Connor, we don't wanna run it on Ashley Nance. We can set up an AKA, but some lenders might, when we say you might have a foreclosure issue, they might pull back and say, we need to fix this. So you're really doing your job the best if you preempt that and have that conversation before you go under contract, when you start looking, so they've got time to update. And if they don't have time, at least you've already told them, use the name on your ID. So they're good there. As far as changing names after the closing, that's a question that I get a lot. So I buy the house as Tyler Connor and Ashley Nance. I then update my name. Now I'm Ashley Connor. Do I have to go update the deed to show my correct name? The answer is no. We don't have to do that. Whenever we go to sell it, then I would just need to provide our marriage certificate. And then I would sign as Ashley Connor, FKA Ashley Nance. So some way to link those together. If they want to update it, they totally can do that. The only thing to keep in mind is the homestead exception. So that's what I caution people on. So if, you know, let's say I buy the house today, we're Ashley Nance and Tyler Connor, and then we apply for homestead in January, and I don't get around to changing my name until June. And then I say, well, I want to update the deed. So I fix my name in June, and then I update the deed in July. I have to apply for homestead again because the deed has been changed. So I try to tell people that at the table when they ask, but it's good for you guys to have that information as well. Homestead stays on the property for as long as you own it and live in the property, but if there's any change to the deed at all, you have to reapply. Even if like you're doing a refinance and I went from Ashley Connor to Ashley N Connor and we changed the deed, you still have to reapply. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, or else they'll lose the homestead exemption, and that would, cost them money, which nobody wants. But other than the name situation, not a whole lot with buyers getting married. Questions on that front? How are you?
Good.
No, you're good. Grab a packet. So buyers getting divorced. Really, what you're focusing on here is, again, the name. You're gonna see that's a common theme, whether there's a marriage or divorce, whether you're a buyer or seller, the whole name change situation is gonna be relevant, okay? Also, is the divorce finalized? A lot of lenders are gonna wanna see that the divorce is finalized before they proceed to closing. You can still apply for it, and a lot of times you can go under contract, like if it's gonna happen soon. But a lot of lenders will want to make sure that the divorce is finalized. And part of that is, in many divorces, alimony and child support are relevant, which if you think about it, plays into the debt to income ratio that a lender is looking at. So if the divorce is not finalized, they see this opportunity for extra payments that the buyer may have to make present itself. They want to see that it's finalized to know what those payments are, if they exist, so they can adequately vet that borrower. From the title perspective, we don't care at all if your buyer is getting divorced. It's not relevant to clearing title at all. The only thing to think about, and what I was talking to Tanaya about a little bit earlier, was if your buyer is getting a divorce or is about to get divorced, whenever they go to sell it, if the divorce was not finalized before the purchase, then you might have to get the ex-spouse involved in the sale. So it's kind of better for everyone and easier on your client for the divorce to be finalized, but from a title perspective, doesn't matter at all, but from a lender perspective, they are gonna care. So I would direct your buyer, if they bring up the fact that they're getting a divorce, I would say, you need to make sure you talk to your lender about that. If, they're on really great terms with their spouse and they just wanna get divorced for whatever reason, then it might be best to wait until after the purchase and then get divorced. And then maybe have that ex-spouse go ahead and sign a quitclaim deed for that property and just have that in your back pocket. You can do that to not mess up the loan process. Because you don't want to file for divorce a week before you're closing. Okay? In any scenario, don't do that.
Why?
Because if you're a buyer and you file for divorce a week before you're closing, that could very much change your debt to income ratio, because right now, you're just scooting along with everything the lender sees, but now there's this pending litigation, because the divorce is open and pending litigation, and it might result in there being alimony or child support. So if you're doing that well beforehand and the lender knows, they can factor that in to the debt to income ratio, and if they're comfortable, we don't care at all. But I don't want it to be, a week before closing, and now all of a sudden the lender says, whoa, 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 we can't do this anymore. Questions on that front? So pretty easy as far as the buyers go, okay? As far as the sellers, diamonds naturally are gonna be a little bit more fun than the divorce side here. But, some questions that I get a lot. So does my new spouse need to be a seller? Okay, so I buy the property in 2017, just in my name. I get married in 2020, and now it's 2023, and we're selling the property, and it's just me on title because we never changed it to include my spouse. So other states, the answer is yes, if you've been living there. Georgia is not a marital property state. So we don't need my spouse at all. He's not relevant in my scenario. We don't need him to approve the sale. We don't need him to sign anything. I'm the only person on title. I can move on and I can sell it. People coming from Florida will have a different opinion and will ask you those questions. And there's other states like that too. But in those states, if it's a primary residence, then the spouse living there has to consent to the sale. Not the case in Georgia, so it makes it easier. Now, you also want to ask them who's on title, right? And really, you should know this because you asked me to pull the deed for you so you can see who's on title. But what does happen sometimes is I bought the property in 2017, I got married in 2020, and then in 2021, I added Tyler to the deed. Now it's 2023, and I forgot I added him to the deed. So I'm the only one that's been talking to you because I know that Georgia's not a marital state. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm here only seller. If Tyler's on the deed, Tyler is the other seller. There's two sellers and we both need to be signing everything. So just kind of keep your eye on that. As far as signing the contract, again, it's whatever is on that government issued photo ID. So if I bought property as Ashley Nance, and now I've gotten married, I'm Ashley Connor, the way I would sign the contract technically would be Ashley Connor, FKA Ashley Nance, formerly known as. That would be the most correct way to sign it, but I would prefer you to see Ashley Connor over Ashley Nance, if you're not gonna set up the full FKA thing, because what'll happen is Ashley Connor will sign the contract, I'll get the deed, and I'll say, wait a minute, this says Ashley Nance. And so I'll say, hey, listing agent / seller, did you get married, did you get divorced, I see that you were on title with this name, you signed a contract with this name, it at least it prompts us to ask those questions. Because if you just have me sign the contract as Ashley Nance, then I'm not gonna notice that there could be a name issue until I see an ID. So if you can set it up as FKA, that's the correct way to do it. But if you're picking one, pick the name on the ID, so at least the closing attorney can say, hey, why don't these match? And then you can provide the correct documentation at that point in time. For closing, really all we need is, again, the ID, and then also the marriage certificate. Now, a lot of people say, can I just bring that to closing with me? What do y'all think? No, why?
You have to clear, and they'll have time to clear title.
Yeah, exactly. So what we do as part of clearing title is we do a name search on everyone involved. And a seller name search is a little bit more involved than a buyer name search. And so if all I know to search is Ashley Nance, and then you show up at closing and the ID says Ashley Connor, and you bring the marriage certificate, that's good, but you're gonna have to sit there and wait for the title examiner to run a name search on Ashley Connor. If we have it set up correctly from the beginning, we'll have all of that done before you ever get to the table. So make sure that if there is a marriage, you're pointing out, hey, we need the marriage certificate. And we kind of rely on you guys to express that early on in the process. And the reason for that is if you're buying a house and it's, 2 days before closing, even a week before closing, you've already started packing up all your stuff, right? So you might have your marriage certificate in storage. It might be on a moving truck coming from Kansas. We don't know. So you tell them at your consultation when they say, oh my gosh, you just got married last year. You say, oh, okay, well, who's on title? Let's look at the names. Here's what I'm gonna need from you. And if you tell them then they have the opportunity to pull those documents before everything is in storage and they can't do it anymore. Okay, so that's where y'all can really help. And then you look like a rock star because you're gonna say, the closing attorney is gonna need X, Y, and Z. And then when we ask for it, they say, oh, my agent told me that you were gonna need this. I have it right here. Here you go. At which point we of course will say, that's what happens when you have an incredible agent. Props to your agent. You're so lucky, right? So we can, help me, help you, help me, all that kind of stuff. But just have those two things ready. We do ask, and I don't know that everyone does this, for no matter who the buyer and seller are and what their marital status is, we always ask for copies of the ID in advance because we want to make sure that we have names spelled correctly. We have all of the names that are on the ID. So they might say, why are you asking for this now? It's just so we can have the paperwork right and it lets us double check. And we check to make sure that it is current. Because I keep saying a government issued photo ID, but it has to be current, right? If it's expired, that doesn't count. So when you send the ID ahead of time, we can make sure the names are right. And if it's expired, you can say, hey, did you know your ID is gonna expire the day before closing? And then they have a chance to get that corrected. Because nobody looks at their ID expiration date, right? I have no idea what mine is. Nobody looks at those, but we of course do. So questions on sellers getting married? Now the real fun begins with the sellers getting divorced. So on our information sheet, and I would imagine most attorneys' information sheets, it's gonna have a question on the marital status, okay? So this is what ours looks like: single, married, separated, divorce / year. Honestly, we should probably add widowed, but if you have someone who's widowed, they can put single, they can put married. That doesn't really matter, okay? married, and kind of put out the definitions here because we see a lot of confusion on these. So married means you are legally married to another person. Not you guys have lived in the same house together for the last 4 years, like you are legally married to them. Single, I think is obvious, you are not married to anybody, right? Separated means official divorce proceedings have been initiated, so you filed some sort of paperwork with the court. We see people checking separated a lot when, like, the two spouses, they might wanna get divorced and they just like move into separate houses, but they don't file any paperwork. We don't care where you live, it really just matters, have you filed any sort of paperwork with the court? That's what separated is. And then divorced is the divorce is actually complete. So it's done, it's finalized, you have a divorce decree. If you have a settlement agreement, but no divorce decree, what are you checking?
Separate.
Separated, correct. So you're married until you file something, at which point you become separated, and you are that until your divorce is finalized. There's a lot of confusion in there, because people think when they file a complaint for the divorce, it means they're divorced, and they're not. So, and we'll ask those questions and figure it out, but it's good for you guys to know that too, because y'all are gonna be the first people that your clients go to with questions, which one do I pick, how do I do this? And then the year is important, because if I get divorced in 2015, and then I buy a house in 2017, we don't need anything for that divorce, because that occurred before I bought the property. The opposite's true, I buy the property in 2017, I get divorced in 2019, the divorce is relevant. So that's why we ask for the year. And then it also says to please provide the divorce decree and the settlement agreement if that's relevant. So the reason that it matters is that we're gonna need paperwork for every single divorce that has occurred during the seller's ownership of the property. And I have had it to where this lady was divorced 4 times, owning this one house. And so it was, you know, we had to search all of the names that she had. We have to have her sign a name affidavit, and we have to clear all 4 of those divorces. And people get kind of touchy about it, like, why do you need my divorce paperwork? That's not relevant to you. It is, we do need it. So just kind of giving them a heads up that, hey, the closing attorney is gonna ask for your marital status. They're gonna ask you for the paperwork for every divorce that's occurred since you've owned the property. And you just want to say it blanket like that, not like, I know that you've been divorced 5 times, like, you know, target them like that. I think that probably goes over a little bit better than if you don't mention it at all, right? So just giving them that heads up is really helpful, and it makes it less confusing for them, less confusing for us, and less stressful for them too, right? Because if you've owned the house for 30 years and you've been divorced 3 times, your first divorce was probably like 20 years ago, right? So where is that paperwork? Nobody knows. If you've told them that at the listing presentation or whenever you sign the listing agreement that they might need that documentation, they can at least go try to find it and establish, really, we have no clue where it is, or, okay, I found it, because you gave me 3 weeks to find it, not, I need this tomorrow. So that is really helpful. So kind of a little quiz, if you are divorced and remarried, what are you checking on my little sheet? I would probably pick married and divorced and provide that paperwork. Because again, you told them that every divorce is relevant and probably gonna need the marriage certificate for the new marriage. So we can search, because if you buy it, get married, get divorced, get married, we need to see how all of those names string together and search all of them.
Yeah, if you're married in another country, does that count? Like, are you married? Is it, because you just said you need a marriage certificate, but if it's in another country, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. We would just need the marriage certificate from that country. If it's not in English, then we might need that earlier rather than later, so we can like get it translated to make sure it is a marriage certificate. But that would be the only kind of holdup. But yeah, that's totally fine. We just need something that links the names together, because if Ashley Nance is on title and Ashley Connor shows up to sell it, like how many Ashleys exist in the world? What if I'm just some fraudster and have nothing to do with Ashley Nance? You have to see the link. But yeah, a foreign marriage certificate is fine. Same thing with a divorce. So again, we'll need that paperwork ahead of time for translation purposes and then for like digestion purposes, if you will, because we're used to seeing what our divorce documents look like. But from another country, it's gonna be set up totally different. So we're gonna have to get it translated and then review it, get the title insurance company to approve it, but I haven't had an issue with that, so that should be fine. So what if you're in the process of getting divorced? What status are you picking? Separate, correct. You simply live in separate homes. Married, yes. And some people don't want to pick that, cause like, they are ready to be divorced. But just tell them that it's really, we don't care what their marital status is, we just need to make sure we have the right paperwork. And I think it helps, cause if you pick separated, then pending litigation could be a problem, and nobody selling their house wants to run into a problem. So if they can pick married, that's so much better. So if you have clients who are thinking of getting divorced, maybe they're both on title, they're gonna get divorced soon. If they can stand it to wait until they sold the property, that is better. I would always encourage that. Now, you can't always do that, you know, some relationships can't do that, but if it's feasible, that's always what I would suggest doing. So pending divorce, this is kind of our worst choice if we're picking something. And if that's what it is, we can deal with it. But if it's avoidable, that's great. This is what's gonna cause the most work for everyone involved, okay? So baseline rule is you can't sell property during open or pending litigation. There's what's called an automatic stay, which freezes all your assets, okay? So pending litigation, pending divorce counts, can't sell property. And this is so important for you guys when you have a listing and you get an offer. If there's pending litigation, don't use a small firm. And of course, I would always love for y'all to close with O'Kelly and Sortian, but the reason I say don't use a small firm truly when there's a pending divorce is different title insurance companies have different opinions on pending divorces. And so we work with like 7 of the biggest title insurance companies, so I can typically get it worked out to where we can close. But there's 1 or 2 that we do work with that say, no, we don't insure pending litigation, period, end of story. Some of the smaller firms only work with 1 title insurance company. So like for me, if I get a no from one of our title insurance companies, I just pivot and I ask another one. And I keep going until I get a pathway to a yes, unless it's like really not insurable. Pending divorce, I can get a yes. How do we get there is gonna differ company to company, but I will get us a yes. We can find a way to close it. But if you're working with a small firm who works with 1 title insurance company and they get a no, your answer is no. There is no ability to pivot. So just be really careful when you have a pending divorce and when you're looking at what law firm they want to close. I would be extra picky on this scenario because you don't want to get stuck with a hard no and then you have to wait for that divorce to be finalized. There are, of course, ways around this. So some of the title insurance companies, honestly, most of the ones that we work with will let us get around it. One of the big considerations is, are the parties represented? So it's typically okay if neither one is represented. It's typically okay if both are represented. Where it's most problematic is if the person on, let's say there's 1 person on title, and maybe I'm on title and Tyler's on, and we're getting pending divorce, okay? If I'm represented and he's not, some title insurance companies are gonna have a bigger issue with that because I'm trying to sell this property. I have an attorney, I'm kind of the power person there. And he's sort of the person on the side that really needs to make sure that their interests are being taken into account and he's unrepresented. That sometimes can be problematic. A lot of times I can get a title insurance company to insure that, so don't think it's horrible, but that is the most problematic of the represented versus not represented scenarios. If it's possible for it to be finalized, obviously that's preferred, but we can typically get around it if need be. The other thing to think about is we're gonna have contact info for the attorneys. So it's another good thing for y'all to go ahead and ask for. If they say we're in the middle of a divorce, okay, let's go ahead and gather up contact info. We need yours, we need the ex-spouse. and we need the attorney contact info for both of you guys, and go ahead and get that put together. That way, when you send us the file, you can say, okay, here's the contract, and here's all the background info, here's the contact info, if you guys need it. And that way we've got it, and we can go ahead and run with it. So, how do you know about a divorce? This one is kind of tricky. The public record is gonna have the divorce, but keep in mind, when our examiner runs the exam, they're only looking in the county that the property is in. So if our house is in Fulton County, but we got married and got our license in Gwinnett County, we get divorced in Gwinnett County, that's not gonna show up on my title exam, because we're only searching Fulton County, because that's where our property is, okay? So you have to rely a little bit on the honesty of sellers, which is not ideal, but it's really the only way to do that. They fill out the seller info sheet, so it is critical that they fill it out correctly in that marital status. We can ask those questions, we can get those documents, we can get it cleared for closing. And so I don't want your sellers to freak out that, oh my gosh, there's a divorce, there's gonna be a problem. It's fine 99.9% of the time. But we need the documents to be able to review in advance to clear it so that it's fine for closing. Also at closing, and this is gonna be true no matter where the closing is, they're gonna have some form of an owner's affidavit, gonna have some language similar to what you see in this little box there, that there's no parties in possession of the property, using the property, or having a right or claim to use or possess the property or any part thereof other than owners, and that no one else have ever questioned or disputed the owner's ownership of the property. So they're gonna sign off on that. If there is an ex-spouse, they do have somewhat of a claim to the property, or they could have a claim. So your seller can't sign this affidavit, honestly, if there's a divorce that's not been disclosed. If they've disclosed it, then we've handled it, and it's not, no other parties, right? So you're good there, but your seller could get in a lot of trouble if they just don't tell anyone about this divorce, okay? We wanna avoid surprises at closing. I've had it to where we get all the way to the table and then the seller says something before we sign everything, like, oh, I'm so glad we're doing this today, I'm in the middle of a divorce and I didn't want my wife to get anything. Well, we're not closing it anymore today. I've had it where we get a call the morning of closing, like, hey, I'm so-and-so's soon-to-be ex-wife, I just wanna know how I'm gonna get my proceeds. I'm sorry, who are you? So that, and it turns out she was legit and she was supposed to get proceeds, but he had not disclosed anything. The divorce was in another county or another state. There was nowhere for us to find that. So that's really not a fun thing for us to learn in closing. And it's really not fun for the buyer either, right? Because now they don't get to buy this house and it's totally the seller's fault. So really, disclosure as soon as possible is the best way to do it, because again, we can work it out to where you can close. But if your ex-wife is supposed to get half the proceeds, like she's gonna get half the proceeds, we can't just scooch around that and have that not be a thing. This is a great tool for you guys to utilize. So this is a little snippet from your exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement. Because I know asking about these things is very touchy and can be very awkward, and you don't want to be like, oh, how was your Wednesday? Are you divorced by chance? Is there any issue there? So it's uncomfortable. This helps make that less uncomfortable. So you're going through your brokerage agreement, and I always think it's good for you to provide it for them to read through and say you have questions, but you want to kind of go through and hit the highlights, right? You're filling that out with them when you're talking to them, and just say, hey, as part of a real estate transaction, there's things that can come up that can cause delays or require extra paperwork. And I'm just gonna kind of run through the different scenarios that are on here and that I've seen before, and you can just let me know if any of those are relevant to you. So then you kind of go down the list. Bankruptcy. Have you ever had a bankruptcy? Are you in bankruptcy? Nope, never. Amazing. Divorce. What is your marital status? Oh, well, my husband and I, just got married last year. Okay, perfect. Are there any past divorces? Because the attorney would ask about it while we're talking about divorce. Oh yeah, I got divorced from, Bob 6 years ago while I owned the property. Okay, well, go ahead and collect that paperwork because the attorney's gonna need it. And then you keep on going down, and they don't feel like you've asked something super invasive because they're looking at this pre-printed document that already asks about all those awkward things. And then the other section is great, like if you start to feel like something else weird is going on there, like, oh yeah, I got divorced from, my husband Bob, because he was in a really bad car accident and he's in a home now, and I love him so much, but I needed to move on with my life, there was no power of attorney. We don't need a conservatorship for Bob, so we need to ask a little bit more information on Bob and probably call me and say, hey, this is what's going on, what do I do? Right, but this form gives you a really good opportunity to ask those questions, delve a little deeper. Always feel free to blame it on us, blame it on the lender, right? Like, the attorney is gonna need this paperwork, so go ahead and pull it, not I'm gonna need this paperwork. Because they're like, you don't need my paperwork, I don't want you to have it. The attorney's gonna need it. Okay, well, I don't want you to see it. No problem, go ahead and pull it and have it handy. I'll let the attorney know that there is a divorce. They're gonna ask you for that paperwork and send it directly to them. I don't need to see it at all. So that way you've avoided the awkwardness, but you've given them the heads up to put it together before they can package everything and can no longer access it. If there is a divorce, and let's say the property's in full, and they got divorced in Gwinnett, and they say, I don't know where that paperwork is. I have no idea how to find it. We can pull it, just tell us, hey, Jane got divorced from Bob in 2009 in Gwinnett County. Our examiner can go look for it. I just say they're not gonna automatically search all the counties. They automatically search the county the property's in, but if it's in Georgia, they can find it and they can pull it. You just let us know. So that's one less thing to be stressed about. They got divorced in like Louisiana, they gotta give us that paperwork. We can't pull it in other states. So some of the documents.
Hey, actually, I have a
Yeah.
question. So I have a seller right now who's going through all that, and he is the only one on title.
Mhm.
His wife filed for divorce, and they have a verbal agreement that's being signed off or being created by their two attorneys and drafted and signed off. But one of the parts of the agreement is, I guess she gets paid X, like, it's not half, but she gets paid a specific dollar amount.
Mhm.
But she also gets 60 days in the house after she gets paid or something like that. So he's like trying to figure out, can he take a HELOC out of his house to sell? And then so that way he can pay her and the 60 days can start counting? Or it's a really weird one because I'm trying to figure out, how do you get 60 days if we're selling the house? And
That is interesting. So I say yes, he can get a HELOC. I don't know what a lender would say. I don't know how much equity there is in the house, say like for sure, yes. But from a title perspective, that's fine for him to get the HELOC. He needs to report that on the seller info sheet, and in no circumstances should he close it out once he's drawn on it. So he needs to keep it, he needs to let us get the payoff and get the paperwork to close it out, or that will absolutely delay the closing. So that's one thing to be careful about. Other thing to be careful about on HELOCs is most of them say if you close this out within, the first 2 years, you have to pay a $500 penalty or whatever it is. Which is really like a him problem, not a you problem or a closing attorney problem, but it adds value to you for you to say, ask your bank whether there's an early closure penalty. And also don't you dare close it on your own. Very important. I'm gonna say that 14 more times, but there might be some sort of like penalty for closing it early. But then he would pay her, let's say he's gonna give her $20,000. He gives her the 20,000. It probably says she'll sign a quit claim deed for receiving the $20,000. Keep really good receipts of the $20,000, because if what the divorce documents say is that she gets 20,000, we're either gonna wanna pay her at closing or see good proof we can show our title insurance company that she has in fact received that money already. So just good records of that to be able to provide us proof that that's been done. And then the 60 days could start tolling. But that's why you also wanna have good records of when that payment was submitted to her, so you can actually see when the 60 days start.
okay,
If the divorce documents don't mention anything about a quit claim deed,
yeah, she's actually not on title.
I know, but
Oh,
a quit claim deed is someone giving up any interest they may or may not have in the property.
gotcha.
You could have an equitable interest. So a lot of times, even spouses not on title have to sign a quit claim deed, just giving up whatever interest they may or may not have had. And so if that's not listed in the divorce paperwork, she's likely still gonna have to do it anyway.
Okay.
So I would go ahead and let us know, like, hey, can you prepare this deed that we're gonna need as part of closing? Or make sure that she's gonna be willing and available to sign that deed as part of closing.
Thank you.
Of course. Was there a question on Zoom? So paperwork, what do you need? If the divorce is finalized, you need the decree. We need the settlement agreement, and we need the contact info for the ex-spouse. Go ahead and ask for all three of these things. You're probably almost always gonna get pushed back, like if the spouse is not on title, saying it's not relevant, we're not gonna need it. Again, blame it on us. Say, that might totally be right. A lot of times, the attorney still does need them to sign some additional paperwork. So I wanna make sure we have that contact info handy in case they need it. And that way, it's not like, oh, we have to talk to it, and we can be the bad guy that says, we have to talk to them. But you've at least prompted them to get that contact info. If it's a pending divorce, you're not necessarily gonna have all of this info. So you're definitely not gonna have a final divorce decree if it's pending, right? Because that's what finalizes the divorce. But we do need to see whatever documents have been filed with the court. And depending on where they are in the process, this is gonna vary. So if they haven't filed anything, not a pending divorce, we're thrilled to death. If they filed the complaint, and that's as far as we've gotten, we just need to see the complaint. Sometimes they file the complaint, and they've also gotten a settlement agreement signed. It's just not a finalized divorce yet. Then we need to see the settlement agreement as well. Okay. And then we need the contact info for the ex, and then the contact information for all the attorneys that are involved. What we typically do when there is a pending divorce, I don't care who's on title, we absolutely will need the soon-to-be ex-spouse, 100% of the time. So if it's pending, go ahead and tell them they will have to be involved. And they're gonna have to sign a quitclaim deed. Now, if they are a seller, then they'll sign all the regular paperwork, but if they're not on title, they're gonna have to sign a quitclaim deed, and then everyone, including the attorneys, is gonna sign what's called a pending divorce disbursement agreement. And this just says, there's a current proceeding, there's a pending divorce going on, this party's represented by this attorney, this party's represented by this attorney. The settlement agreement says do this with the proceeds, so that's what we'll do, or there is no settlement agreement, this is how parties have agreed to split the proceeds. And then we have the attorneys sign off on it as well. Because I think from a title insurance perspective, remember, they operate from a risk assessment perspective. And so things that have come up in the past for them, they want to avoid. It looks risky. And so I think in the past, people have said, well, I didn't understand what I was signing. If my attorney had seen it, then they would have fixed it. So we get the attorneys to sign it. That's what the title insurance companies require. So y'all going ahead and having that contact info ready is super, super helpful. So what is a settlement agreement? Really, what that is the document that both sides sign agreeing on what they're gonna do with the assets. So most of the time, if they own property together, there'll be a whole paragraph on 123 Cherry Street telling us what to do with 123 Cherry Street. So that's really what we're looking for. We're looking to make sure that the divorce is the people that we think it is. We're looking for the paragraph regarding our piece of property. And then we're looking for the signatures to make sure it's like a real settlement agreement, okay? So the terms of the sale and the instructions on the proceeds. Now, the settlement agreement, what happens when the divorce is finalized, it incorporates the settlement agreement into that decree. And remember, a divorce decree is a court order. So that's a very strong document, okay? So once the divorce is finalized, the settlement agreement has the strength of a court order, because it's incorporated into that divorce decree. But also keep in mind, the only people bound by that court order are the husband and the wife, or the two spouses, whatever it is. So I say that to say, we're not necessarily bound by that. So if the court order says we're splitting it 50-50, and both parties say, you know what, honestly, she paid to like put a whole new fence in, I'll take 50 grand and let's give her 70 grand she paid for that fence. If they're both gonna sign off on it, that's fine. Totally fine. But where there is an argument, we're gonna kind of say, your court order says this, you guys are stuck, if there's not an agreement. But if they agree to do something else, that's fine, because we're not a party to that court order, we're not the ones who are technically bound by that. You're gonna get a lot of people who say, my divorce gave me the property, we don't need my spouse for anything, whether or not that spouse is on title. They're still gonna tell you that. Is it possible for a settlement agreement incorporated into a divorce decree to actually vest title in one spouse alone? Yes. In the 7, however many years I've been doing this, I've seen exactly one do that. So it rarely happens. And again, what I was talking to Tanaya about earlier, right before the class, is that different attorneys, we have our different specialties, right? So like, I know a lot about real estate, I don't know as much about divorce law or probate law. I know how it fits into the real estate world, but vice versa, same thing for them. They kind of know how divorce fits into the real property world, but they don't know the real property world. And so most of the time, these settlement agreements don't have that magic language that truly vests property in that individual spouse. It gives them a right to be the sole owner. It doesn't make them the sole owner. So pointing that out to your clients is gonna be really important. When they say, oh, no, my divorce gives it to me, say, okay, it might. A lot of times, it doesn't quite do that, so let's send it to the attorney and she'll let you know. But let's go ahead and get that contact info just in case, right? So you haven't said yes or no, but you've sort of planted the seed. That might not be true. I put err on the side of assuming that the settlement agreement alone is not sufficient, because like I said, of all the divorces I've seen exactly one best property in the one person. So typically needed from an ex-spouse, really it depends on whether they're on title. If they're on title, then they're a seller. It's not like you need specific things from them. We of course need the divorce documents, but we need that from both sellers, right? But they are a seller. They need to sign your listing agreement. They need to sign your contract. They're gonna sign all of the closing paperwork. They are a seller. If they're not on title, then typically what we need is the disbursement agreement and the quitclaim deed. So the disbursement agreement just acknowledges how the proceeds are gonna be split. If, let's say I'm the only one on title and got divorced from Tyler sometime during the ownership of our property, and he says, no, you own this before we got married, I don't need any part of that, the disbursement agreement can say 100% to Ashley, and that's fine. We just need him to acknowledge that he's not getting anything from the sale of the property. So those are typically what we need. We don't always need them, but that's what I would want to give a heads up might be required.
Hey, okay, one more question, I'm sorry, just because I have like, because I have one right now.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying about divorce attorneys may intend to write the paperwork a certain way, but it may not actually be written that way, like you said, you only have the one. If we're a proactive agent, can we come to you and ask for verbiage that you can provide to their attorney to put into their thing if it's not already finalized, so that it can be, it'd be your second one?
Yeah, and that's totally fine, I'm happy to do that. What I'll do is I'll run it by the title insurance company saying, hey, these people are getting divorced. They want to know the exact language put in the settlement agreement so that you guys won't need anything from the other spouse. I'll need to know who's on title, because that'll change what the language is. But I say all that to say, definitely send it to me, but give me a day or two to get back to you. Don't say, hey, they're meeting their attorney in 1 hour, what's the language? Because I want the title insurance company to tell me what it is.
Okay.
So that we're all on the same page, because title insurance companies differ, right? So again, since they're risk-based, title company A might tell me something different than B might tell me something different from C, subtly different. But if I ask A, then I'll get it insured with A, and that's what we're gonna roll with.
Okay.
So that way we have it all set up and it's super clear. So why do we care about an ex-spouse that is not on title? This is gonna be another question that you guys get. We care because they can have what's called an equitable interest. What an equitable interest is essentially another written interest, but they have done something that gives them interest. So an example of that, I buy the property all by myself. Tyler and I get married, we got a joint bank account, so both of our money goes to paying the mortgage for 10 years, then we wanna sell it. he has somewhat of an interest in the property because he's been helping to pay the mortgage for the last decade, okay? That's really what an equitable interest is. I've seen this as well. So the unaccessible X, what happens if you can't find them? I had one the other day, and you'll find that there's a little bit of a difference between someone who's truly inaccessible and someone says my X is, I can't find them, but when push comes to shove, they can absolutely find them. There's a little bit of a difference. And I just had that in a closing that I had didn't disclose that he was divorced. Luckily, it came up on the title exam, and the divorce decree itself said we gotta split proceeds 50-50. So we said, we need your ex-wife. He's like, well, I can't find her. How do we proceed? You find her. That's how we proceed. And lo and behold, we found her. So like, she existed. But that'll happen a lot too, is, oh, I can't find them. Can we just move on? No, we really need them. But you really can't find them. And the way I present it is, yeah, we can proceed without the X, but you have to have a court order explicitly saying that you're both on title or you both have an interest and that you alone can sell the property. At which point they're gonna say, wait, doesn't that take a lot of time and effort? Yes, it does, but that's how you have to proceed if you can't find the X. And I had that, one time I had this lady and the ex had like run off with some younger lady and they moved to Australia allegedly, like via Canada. She's like, I don't know how to get him, like I truly don't. He's in Australia last I heard, like I literally can't get him. So she did end up getting a court order where it was like, we can't get this guy at all, I need to sell this house. They granted the court order and she was allowed to sell it, because a court order is like the pinnacle of what we can rely on. A court order is gonna override your deed. So you really can't find the X, the court order is the route you have to go. I would direct them to their divorce attorney to get that moving. Okay. If the X is not on title and the divorce is relatively recent, it kind of depends on what the settlement agreement says as to what we're gonna have to do. Again, proactively get that contact info for the X going. But if they got divorced in the last year, we're probably gonna need some sort of deed and disbursement agreement from them. If they have owned the property for 40 years and they got divorced 35 years ago, and they're the only one on title, and the settlement agreement and divorce docs don't say anything about what, they don't say that the ex is supposed to get anything, we can safely assume if the ex needed something, they would have mentioned it in the last 35 years, right? So that's a little bit easier to work with. And then the money bit, so who gets the proceeds? Y'all know that we have to send proceeds to whoever is on title, it's kind of our general rule, right? So if I'm the only one on title, I'm typically the only one who's gonna get proceeds, and I can't give half to my sister, because I just love her so much, right? But in a divorce, it is a little bit different, because this other person does have an equitable interest in the property. They therefore have a means to which we can pay them part of the proceeds. So we look to see what the settlement agreement and the court order say, and then of course the agreement of the party. So if I'm the only one on title, but my settlement agreement says I'll get, 80% and Tyler gets 20%, then that's how we're gonna be able to pay Tyler the 20% out of the closing, because there is a title issue or a title interest that allows us to make that payment. Does that make sense? Yeah.
In a non-divorce, can you say like it's husband and wife, but only the husband's on title? Can you wire the money to a joint account, or does it have to be just the
No, a joint account is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine, because really, we're gonna send it to the husband and whoever else is on that account with him, doesn't matter at all. So yeah, that's perfectly fine. But what we can't do is to say, well, we have an account in just my wife's name and that's our safety account, can you wire it there instead? No, we can't do that, husband's the only one on title, but joint is fine. Yep. So even if the ex is not on title, if there's something that creates a reason for us to submit proceeds, again, we can do that through the settlement agreement or through the court order. Where it gets a little bit stickier is paying off certain items. So a lot of times what we'll see in the settlement agreement, and again, this comes down to divorce attorneys not being real estate attorneys and not kind of understanding what we are and are not able to pay off at a closing, is they'll say, the house to be sold, the following items to be paid from the proceeds, and then split 50-50. And it's like pay off, the Toyota car, and then pay off the Amex credit card, pay off the Macy's credit card, and list all of these credit cards, and then split it 50-50. we can't pay all those credit cards for the seller. We're gonna split it 50-50, and then the seller can pay those. What we can do is if there is an actual like court order that says closing attorney must pay following items as part of closing, then we can do that. Again, that is super rare, and I've only had that like once, maybe twice. And that was a case where it was a very difficult, as in like there had been multiple court orders, he was in contempt a bunch of times, like it was a problem. But normally they're not written to mandate us to pay things out of closing. And so thinking about it, the only people we can pay is someone who's got some sort of interest in the title. So a lien that's on title, we can pay off a lien, that's a title issue. A security deed that creates an interest in the property, it's a title issue, we pay that off at closing. A divorce, someone has an equitable interest in the property, we can pay them at the closing. The credit card company has nothing to do with the title. Just because the divorce documents say that it should get paid out of the proceeds, doesn't mean that it's gonna be at the closing. So just kind of be aware of that and be careful with that. A couple of considerations when a divorce is involved. From a pre-closing perspective, let us know about any kind of special requests, like if, for example, the two sellers don't get along at all and they don't want to both be copied on the same email, like she went and got a new email, she doesn't want you to have it. Tell us that so we know not to do that, because a lot of times what happens is they'll say there's a divorce. Some divorces are great, some are really contentious, we don't know unless y'all tell us. So then when we send an email to both, because we send an email to all sellers and their agent, then, you know, they call yelling at us, it's like, wow, could you put them on the same email? We don't know to not do that unless you tell us, right? Or, hey, this divorce is really, really nasty, his heart is totally broken and he cannot stomach talking about it at all. Anything you need, ask me as the agent, right? Those kind of things, let us know. Also, if the divorce documents don't have a clear split on what the proceeds are doing, or maybe it's a pending divorce, let us know how they want to split the proceeds so we can have it set up correctly, and that's not as much discussion if they want to avoid the discussion. Because if it's not the proceeds split, it's not set up, they come to closing, we have to change paperwork, not a big deal, but it's gonna, you know, take a couple extra minutes. So let us know what that proceeds split is if you guys know it, otherwise we'll ask them about it. On the closing day, things to think about and let us know, do parties need separate rooms? Sometimes the divorce is fine, they can sit there together and that's great, sometimes it's not, and it's better if one signs earlier than the other. Or they come at the same time, but they just sit in separate rooms. If that's needed, let us know ahead of time so that we can make sure everything is all set, we have the rooms to do that, all that good stuff. And then needing to sign at different times. If we just need a couple things signed, like if the wife is just signing a quick claim deed and a disbursement agreement, she can come and sign that, that's not a problem. But if she wants to do that, let us know. And then I put to encourage clients to remain professional if they're gonna sit at the closing table together. I've seen quite a few closings where the two ex-spouses were like, oh no, we're fine to sit in a room. And then they made the whole thing so unbearably uncomfortable and kind of, you know, kind of ruined the buyer's day, right? The buyer comes in so thrilled to have this new house. And then these arguing sellers just like make it so uncomfortable and it ruins it. So if they're not able to do that, let's do the split closing or the signing early or something. And that's all I've got. You guys have questions for me? Yeah.
So what happens if the attorney doesn't discover that the seller's divorced or married and the seller hid it?
So if the seller gets married and doesn't change their name, it doesn't matter. So that's fine. If they change their name when they show up to closing, they have to have their ID. So we'll discover it then. If they don't say anything about a divorce, then technically the wife could sue the seller and also could tell the buyer, hey, I have an interest in your property. The title insurance company would step in and cover that, so it should be fine for the buyer, but it could create a lawsuit. So, and it's, you know, they're gonna get nabbed, the seller for sure, is because they will have lied on the seller info sheet, they will have lied on the affidavit that says that nobody else has an interest, when clearly you were getting a divorce and that person had an interest. Worst case scenario, if a court says, no, that ex-spouse who wasn't spoken to at all totally has a right in the property. It might be that the buyer does lose the property, but keep in mind the title insurance company is gonna cover that cost. So they'll be made whole, but they might lose the property. Just depending.
Good stuff.
All right, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate you coming. And don't forget to put up Kelly and Sawyer on page one of those contracts. Let me know if y'all need.
Good job. Okay, now time for the main. Hello, darling.
Busy today, all right, that's good. That's right, and everybody educated.